what I was thinking of just to get started up again was over the next weeks and months, we're going to continue developing the shame stuff that we've been spending so much time on because it's such a key underlying issue for people in addiction. And we're going to be looking at some painful topics around that. But we're also going to go into the whole area of trauma, anxiety, fear, and just how common that is in the whole area of addiction and very broken people, and how that people who've experienced trauma in childhood tend to put themselves into situations where they get re-traumatized. And so it becomes a massive issue. And so what I want to do before we head into those painful topics is to just give some tools to help you go into that. Trauma basically is this. It's when you face a dangerous situation and you don't have the resources to handle it. And that's the key. It's dangerous minus resources. And so you can think of yourself as a child facing an angry father who's ready to beat you, and you're faced with an extremely dangerous situation, zero resources to handle it. And so you experience trauma. And that continues for many people into their teen years, where they get traumatized either through being attacked, jacked, raped, all of those things. But trauma becomes an ongoing thing, and there's still not the resources to deal with it. What we know today in counseling is that for people to get healthy, they have to go back and deal with that trauma stuff that was left unresolved, that was stuffed down, hoping it would go away. And the challenge becomes for most counselors today is if you take a person back into trauma, but they don't have resources to deal with it, you're no further ahead. They're just going to relapse. You're just bringing up pain without giving them the tools to deal with that pain. And what I find, and I watched about a year ago a training session around trauma, and I shook my head at the end of it, because what was obvious to me was that the counselor, what they were basically saying to the client was, I can't give you any resources because I don't know what to say to you, so somehow just let it go. And that's sad to me. And so what I want to do tonight is just give you a key ingredient in dealing with trauma and painful things. But having said that, in order to give you this key ingredient, I got to take you on a little journey, and I have to build a kind of step-by-step logic here so you see where we're going. But this journey is going to probably take you through a bit of pain tonight. So let me just lay it out that the way God designed life for a child, when it comes to dealing with painful stuff, is that a child would grow up in a home where parents truly loved them and accepted them and respected them and provided a safe environment. And that's those needs 4 to 7 that we've talked about almost every week. That was God's design, that a child grows up not experiencing trauma within the home, but feeling safe, nurtured, loved, respected, and accepted for who they are. Also, the second thing is that as a child comes into the world, they are 100% dependent on the parents for food, to get changed, for protection, for every single need. The goal of the parent becomes 2 things. They want to train the child so that they begin to get a toolbox full of skills to handle life as an adult. And so that they can kind of pass the baton to the child when they get into their late teens, saying, I have given you all the tools that you're going to need to face life from here on. I will be here for you, but you are on your own. But more than that, there's a second piece, and that is Instead of depending on me as an earthly father, I want to teach you to transfer that trust to a heavenly parent, a heavenly father, so that you can develop a relationship with him. And those two ingredients, tools and a transferred relationship of trust and dependence to God, become the way a child is prepared for adult life and for painful circumstances. Now, if you're here, you're probably saying, in what world does that happen? Because it sure didn't happen in my world. And what we know is that for pretty well everybody in addiction, they grew up with parents who did not consistently meet those needs 4 to 7. They were criticized, neglected, abused, abandoned, all of this stuff that we've talked about. Parents weren't there to protect the children. Rather, parents were actually the inflictors of abuse and therefore trauma. And what is becoming very clear over the last few years in studying children and the brains of children who grew up in homes where needs 4 to 7 were not met consistently is that they're realizing they were traumatized from childhood. And that trauma was not a one-time event. It was a daily event or a weekly event. And it became a very painful world and a very unsafe world for them. And so what were the options for the child? We've talked about the God-given things when I face danger are fight or flight. But a child is too small to run away and too small to fight. So they go to option 3, freeze, stuff it, act like nothing bothers you, whatever. Act like you don't care. But more than that, I've only got one person in this world that I can trust. Myself. Can't trust mom and dad, can't trust anybody else. In my circle of family or friends, they've all let me down, so I have to trust me. You want to know what that feels like? You probably do. You grow up feeling all alone, but more than that, you grow up feeling like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders. Nobody's there to help me. How do I face all of this responsibility? How do I deal with all of this danger? And the result of that, and what we're finding again more and more through research, is when anxiety disorders develop. Because you realize it's little me with very few resources to face this overwhelming world, that creates a ton of anxiety. And if I only got me to trust, that's scary. And so anxiety disorders develop because home was not a safe place. Parents did not protect. Parents did not give tools. And parents did not help a child to realize God could be trusted with their life. So let me make some observations then about parents. About 90% of addicts were deeply wounded by their parents. There's major issues there. And that is something that we've talked about, and it's not to blame parents and paint them as just ugly ogres, because I also have to face the fact that I chose to respond to that stuff in ways that only ended up making it worse. But that is the reality there. Parents weren't on their team fighting for them, though they may have thought they were. But from the child's perceptions, parents were the enemy, inflicting the damage on them, creating an environment where they felt scared, inadequate all the time. Next week, I want to talk more about this because it is such a huge issue. When somebody comes into Tamarack, I can assume 100% of the time that they will have mommy or daddy or both issues. They will have a mom or a dad that lived in a way either due to illness, either due to their belief system, either due to their addiction or their own issues, that cause that child to be wounded and to not feel safe. That is just a given. And so I'm going to talk about it more next week, but let me just say this, that for most or many of you, this is a big issue in your recovery. It is a big issue for you to deal with and resolve, and it's not easy to do. It is very, very difficult, especially if mom and dad are still unhealthy. It is a huge issue. And so it may involve grieving that mom and dad will never be proud of you, that mom and dad will never have a healthy relationship with you. You may have to grieve that, and that's tough. It also may mean forgiving them for how they have hurt you, how they have not been there for you. And that's tough too, because that goes to your deepest wounds and your deepest pain. But more than that, there's some practical boundaries that may need to be set if they are still not healthy, where you have to say, no, I am under no obligation to have them involved to this extent in my life. I can set the boundaries. And we're going to talk about that. And maybe if they are wanting to deal with their stuff, there may be a time and a place for you to talk to them about how your relationship with them was growing up. And that may lead to some constructive healing and rebuilding of a relationship. Having said that, for tonight, here's what I want you to do is back away and just think about this. Even if you came from the most perfect home that you could imagine, do you realize that there is not one human parent that can perfectly meet needs 4 to 7 in your life? That leads to a question. Why does God create within us this desire to have a parent who would always be there for me, who would always accept me, respect me, and love me and nurture me? Why do I have such a consuming desire to be validated and approved by my parents? And now you're telling me there's not one parent in the world that could do that. Is God setting me up to be frustrated? No. You might think he is, and sometimes I wonder. But let me say this. Here is what I believe is the reason one of the reasons God gave us parents. It's to say parents are just a sign on the road. So you see a sign on the road that says Winnipeg, 25 kilometers, straight that way. And what parents were designed to be is to be a sign that said, look up. There's a perfect parent somewhere, but he's not down here. And they were to point us and be a road sign that says, your relationship with me is a temporary one as a human parent. You need a perfect parent. Stop and just think about it from this perspective. One of the things that I do from time to time at Tamarack when we talk about this parent issue, because it's such a common thing that comes up over and over again, is I go to the whiteboard and I just say, tell me what you would long to have in a parent. And they begin to fill the board with just things they speak out. So number one, they love to have a parent who was their hero and their role model, that showed them by their life how to deal with life, how to live. They would love to have a parent who consistently provided for their needs for food, safety, housing, love, all of those things. They would love to have a parent who they could always depend on to be there to protect them no matter where they were or what hour of the day. They would love to have one who had tremendous wisdom to guide them through the tricky parts of life. They would love to have one that they could rely on day or night, that they would always be available, that they become this rock, that when life is falling apart, I can go to that parent, and they'll be there for me. And I would love to have a parent that was proud of me. A parent who delighted in me. Who, when they saw me, their eyes lit up. Who just was proud of me. I would love to have that. And if you sum it up, it's I'd love to have a parent where strength and tenderness combine. You know what they've just described? God. You think of that? Built into us is a longing for a perfect parent. But it's not going to happen here. All of us as parents wound our children, no matter how much we try not to. But we long for something bigger than a human parent. We long for God. That might be new to you, and I'm not going to try to shove it down your throat. I just ask you to give it some thought. And I know from where I come from as a counselor, to think of God as a parent for some, it does not compute. Because the God that they were raised with was not a loving, tender, reliable, gentle father. It was a cruel, punishing, grouchy, miserable, ruin your parade type of person. And so what I want to do in the remainder of our time here is say this. Okay, you may have been taught that about God, either by your parents saying, you better watch out because God's watching you all the time. And if he sees you doing something when you're not in the house, he'll get you. And you walk around with this constant fear that God's going to punish you. Is that taught in the Bible? Or how is God as a parent taught? Now, before I go through them, I want to just give you this. One of the things that's so important to understand is that when it comes to God as a parent, we're also told in the Bible, when Jesus left, he says, my body now, how I will work in the world, is through people that follow me. They will become my arms and my legs. They will become my mouth. They will become my hugs. People now become that. And so when you think of God as a parent, you have to also think of the followers of God as part of what he uses as a parent to meet the needs of a child. So that's, just have to say that up front. And so what becomes important in dealing with this is I need a relationship with God as a parent, but I also need people who love God in my life. Two things under that one umbrella. So number one, the biggest, deepest wound that I see in clients is with those who have been abandoned by their parents. They have been abandoned either because the parents have turned them over to adoption, CFS, they have died on them, or they have gotten a divorce and basically walked out of their life. But that becomes the deepest wound. And what God says with so much clarity over and over again, in Hebrews 13, he says it with the most emphasis. He says, for God said, I will never fail you, I will never forsake you. Now, let me just give you a little quick lesson. You know that in English, if you say two negatives in a row, that means a positive? I hated English, so my wife's had to teach me. But that's what I'm told. But here, and this is my support for how I talk, is the author of the New Testament in Hebrews, he puts two negatives together. And he says, God will never, never leave you. Never, 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 never. He just keeps driving home and emphasizing that this is an impossibility, that God will not leave you. And then to put it into terms that help me get a hold of what does he mean by that, in Isaiah 43 it says, when you go through deep waters and trouble. Kim talked about a scary thing being underwater. When we were in the Caribbean, we went scuba diving. First time in my life. When you breathe through your nose all your life and you go underwater and you have to suck air out of a pipe into your mouth, that was a scary experience. And at times you panic, saying, I'm having trouble. It's not flowing as easily as it would above water. And that's scary. But what he says, when you pass through deep waters, I'll be with you. When you go through rivers of difficulty, you will not drown. Now, what we would like to read there is, I will never let you go through rivers of difficulty. But it didn't say that. Did you notice that? It's because you're going to have times when you feel like you're drowning, but I won't let you drown. And that's where I love 1 Corinthians 10. It says, no temptation has taken you except what is common to mankind, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear, but when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. I've heard people who have relapsed say that verse isn't true. He let me be tempted above what I was able to bear. And I go, I think maybe you just didn't take the way out. And then I want you to notice something, the very end, it's so that you can endure it. What happens when it starts to get tough, we say, God, I'm not enjoying this emotion. God, I'm not enjoying having to go a craving. Could you just give me a detour and a bypass so I can get to the other side quickly? He says, no, you have to go through it and endure it. That's where our part comes in. And what God says is, I'm going to take you through stuff. You have to walk with me. I won't ever leave you, but it doesn't mean I'm going to make your life easy, and it doesn't mean you're going to get so strong you don't need me anymore. You're going to have waters of difficulty. You're going to have temptations that seem overwhelming at times, but I'll always provide a way through. Not a way around, not a bypass, but a way through. So number one, I will never abandon you. Number two, constant care and protection. I kind of like this, because Jesus always used little word pictures that were wonderful. He says, are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Here's the point. Sparrows were considered to be the awfulest, cheapest form of getting a meal. You ever tried to kill a sparrow and eat the breast meat? 1 bite, if that. And so they were such a poor source of meat that you couldn't sell a sparrow for a penny. That was considered a ripoff. The best you could do was sell 2 sparrows for a penny. That's how insignificant sparrows were. They're so plentiful and such poor sources of a good meal that's how they were done. And then he goes on to talk about the very hairs of your head are numbered. That's getting easier for God with me. But for most of you, what I want you to understand is this. Hair is the only part of your human condition, your external, that is totally aesthetic only. It has no practical purpose outside of making you look cute or cool. Hair is just an extra accessory that has no practical value for keeping you alive. So what Jesus has done is taken the 2 most insignificant things that they would readily connect with, and what does he say? Not a sparrow falls to the ground without God being aware of it. And not a hair falls off your head without God knowing about it. In other words, he takes care of little insignificant details. Now you're probably saying, well, then why didn't he rescue me from being sexually abused? Why didn't he rescue me from being raped? We'll come to that. But what I want you to see for now, and I hope you will see, and as you heal and as you grow, that maybe God allowed me to go through that very difficult fire of sexual abuse, etc., but it doesn't mean he forgot about me. And that I hope you will come to in time. But the point I want you to see right now is that God gives careful attention to every little detail. You want to know what bugs my kids about me as a dad? I know my daughter works certain days, and every day, every week, it's the same schedule. But for the life of me, do you think I can remember it from one week to the next? And so I say, are you working today? And she'll roll her eyes. When do I work, Dad? I don't know. I forgot. And it's, okay, Dad, You're good on big details, but some of the little ones, you stink. Okay, accepted. But the Father in heaven doesn't miss a detail, no matter how significant. And then his care is consistent and reliable. It's unchanging, and it's always from a loving character and a wise mind. In James 1, every good and perfect gift is from above. And then it goes on, it says, he is the Father of heavenly lights who doesn't change like a shifting shadow. And a shifting shadow is that as the sun goes, it's constantly changing. 1 minute it's this big, the next minute it's bigger, the next minute it's bigger. That's the reality of life, is change, change, change. That's the reality of people, is change. And the point is that God doesn't do different things. It's that God's character underneath his actions is constant. Never, ever changes in the slightest little bit. So important. Number 4. I love this one. Comforter. Praise be to the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort. It doesn't say some comfort. All comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles. And that may be where he uses the body of people to comfort you. That may mean that he uses as a meditation or an experience to help you feel his comfort. Doesn't mean he's going to take the pain away right away. Doesn't mean it's going to be like you're not going to have to cry all of a sudden. You still got to go through that. But he says, I'll comfort you in it as you need it. And then helper. When I was a young boy, this verse all of a sudden showed up in our kitchen, and I learned later that my mom and dad were going through a particularly difficult event in their life. And so they put this on the wall, and I've never forgotten it. And it's become a favorite of mine. It says, do not fear, for I will be with you. Do not be dismayed or discouraged, for I'm your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. And I have hung on to that verse so many times in my life and felt his faithfulness in that. One other verse, Romans 8, says, if God is for us, who can be against us? And you can say, well, I know there's lots of people against me. But that's not the point. The point is, if God, who is this person of infinite wisdom, love, and power, if he's on your team, everybody else looks like an ant against a bulldozer. And so, if a bulldozer is on your team and an ant comes and says, I'm going to stop you, you go, if the bulldozer's for me, you can't be against me. And that's the point. I've told this story before, but it's of a young boy and his friend who were in school in Southern California. Roger and John. John was a preacher's kid, and Roger was a fat little Pillsbury boy whose voice hadn't changed. And he was in junior high, and he was picked on, and John was a good little Sunday school friend, and so he felt he had to hang around with Roger. So they went to school, and they got pushed into lockers. They got books pushed out of their hands and kicked down the hall, all of that stuff. And one day they went into the change room to get ready for gym, and they got pushed over the benches, and their heads banged into the lockers. And little Roger, in his squeaky little voice, said, that's it. I'm not going to take this anymore. And John says, what do you mean? What are you going to do about it? He says, I'm going to get my brother. And his brother was a defensive lineman for the UCLA Bruins football team. 260 pounds of muscle. The next day, Roger came walking into school, and he went to the corner where all of the cool kids smoked. And he just stood there, and his brother was standing beside him, and all the kids turned and looked at little Roger, and his brother said, which one? And Roger pointed out the leader, and he went up to him, and he picked him straight off the ground, and he says, don't touch my brother again. And he threw him over a hedge onto the other side. You know what? From that day on, Roger was never afraid to go to school again. Why? because he had resources now. He had resources on his team. And that's what Romans 8 is saying. If God's on my team, doesn't matter who's on the other team. They don't stand a chance. And so, what is God's design for a child that has a nightmare or a child that is getting bullied at school is that they can run home to mom or dad and say, I'm scared. And mom and dad will say, I'll take care of it. And what is God saying? What was God's design is that we transfer that dependence to him now. And when I'm facing pain and when I'm facing trauma, that I can run to him and say, I'm scared. I need you. Guide me, comfort me, protect me, help me. And we find that. And some of you say that's a wee bit of a stretch. And all I ask for you today is just to give it some thought. And hopefully in the weeks ahead, the pieces will start to make sense to you. And that you would have a relationship with God, not as a cruel, mean ogre in the sky, but as a daddy that you can run to. Let's pray. Father, you desire a relationship with each one of us. You have made us so that we can't survive in this world alone. We don't have resources to handle it. And so I just pray that you would work in each of our hearts and just help us to develop a growing trust in your character and your love. For your glory I pray. Amen.